Some peninsulas are so strange in shape, color, or scale that they barely look real. From ice-covered wilderness, desert coastlines, and volcanic landforms, these narrow stretches of land can feel more like something imagined than something found on a map. Here are 15 of the strangest-looking peninsulas on the planet. Starting with number 15. The Dingle Peninsula, that's a great name, sticks out into the Atlantic on Ireland's southwest coast, and almost every part of it looks dramatic. You get these steep headlands, narrow roads, green hills, these old stone walls, scattered ruins, and the views that seem to go on forever. It has that wind-swept, edge-of-the-world kind of feeling that people often imagine when they picture Western Ireland. Except here, it feels much more concentrated. One minute you're looking at patchwork fields divided by stone walls that have been there for generations. A few minutes later, the land falls away and the Atlantic opens up in front of you. Then the road curves again and suddenly there are cliffs, beaches, little coves, and offshore islands sitting out in the water. It keeps changing, but it never feels random. It all belongs together. But that is a big part of why the peninsula looks so unreal. A lot of places have one or two great viewpoints. Dingle feels like it has them constantly. The scenery doesn't feel packed into one famous overlook, it's spread out all over the peninsula. You never really feel like you've fully seen it, because around the next bend there's usually another stretch of coastline that looks even better than the last one. And the history helps too. Dingle is full of old sites that make the land feel deeper rather than busier. There's early stone huts, these ancient forts and old churches, and traces of communities that have been part of the peninsula for a very long time. It feels like the land and the history grew up together. It feels like a real place that people have been living with and farming, crossing, and surviving in for centuries. And then there's the Blasket Islands off the western tip, and once you notice them, they add a whole other layer to the whole scene. They make the peninsula feel even farther out, as if the land stretched it out as far as it can into the ocean before giving up completely. Knowing that people once lived out there only makes the whole area feel more unusual. Number 14. The Cape Peninsula in South Africa. This one feels like several different places somehow started sharing the same strip of land. It runs south from Cape Town along a narrow sweep that makes it so memorable at how much variety it manages to squeeze into the space. You get city, mountain, beaches, cliff, ocean, rare planet life, penguins, and one of the best-known coastal viewpoints in the world, all in one peninsula. It almost kind of seems unfair. It's not just beautiful, it's packed. Most landscapes build around one idea. The Cape Peninsula seems to collect all the great features from completely different places and just stack them together. One stretch feels urban and polished, another feels wild and exposed. A little farther on, it can suddenly look like a nature reserve at the end of the world. The southern end is where the peninsula really starts to show off. Cape Point and the Cape of Good Hope have that famous dramatic look that people instantly recognize, the rough ocean and the sense that the land is run out. The sea does not feel calm there, even when the weather's good. It feels powerful and unsettled, which gives the whole peninsula an extra charge. You're not just looking at a nice coastline, you're looking at a place that's been associated with difficult seas and long voyages for centuries. But what makes it even stranger is how much life is packed into it. The peninsula sits in one of the world's great plant regions, with covered slopes and open ground in a way that makes the whole landscape feel very detailed and specific. Then, not far away, you got Boulder's Beach, where African penguins live in a place that most people would never guess they would. Now that alone makes the peninsula feel unusual, and there's not many places where cliffs, a major city, and rare coastal vegetation all belong to the same stretch of land. And because Cape Town's there right at the top of it, the contrast gets stronger. A lot of famous natural landscapes feel remote. The Cape Peninsula does not. It feels wild and famous and dramatic while still sitting beside a major city. It feels accessible, but not tame. Number 13. Peninsula Valdes in Argentina. It's got a very different kind of beauty from most of the places on this list. It doesn't rely on huge mountains or bright forests or dramatic city skylines. In fact, at first glance, it can almost look plain. It pushes out into the South Atlantic from Argentina as a broad, dry, pale stretch of land, and that simple look is exactly what makes it so strange. From above, it almost seems too cleanly shaped to be natural. Now, the peninsula extends far out into the sea, and the narrow strip connecting it to the mainland makes it feel slightly detached, as if it's almost its own world. There is not much softness here. There's no lush covering and no big river valleys, just dry land, sky, wind, and water. And at first, that can make Valdes seem empty. But that's the trick of this place. It only looks quiet. In reality, it's one of the great wildlife landscapes in the world. The waters and coastlines around the peninsula are famous for southern right whales, elephant seals, sea lions, and orcas. So what looks minimal from a distance turns out to be full of movement and life once you understand what's actually happening there. This is a place where the drama is not always the land itself. A lot of this is happening just offshore or right along the edge. The beaches that seem empty become breeding grounds. The open water becomes a place where whales gather, and the shoreline becomes a hunting zone. Once you know that, the whole peninsula changes. It stops looking bare and starts looking like a huge natural stage. And there is also something about the color and scale of the place that makes it very easy to remember. The land is often pale and dry, the sea can look deep blue, and the sky feels enormous, and that gives this place a very strong visual identity. It doesn't overwhelm you with detail, it sticks in your mind because of its clean, open look. Number 12. The Paracas Peninsula in Peru. It looks like two different worlds that are touching each other without really mixing. On one side, you got the Pacific Ocean. On the other, you've got one of the driest desert regions in Peru. And the result is a place that can look almost unreal from the start. These huge stretches of bare earth, steep coastal bluffs, pale deserts, and then bright ocean water cutting against all of it. But what makes it so striking is how clean the landscape feels. It's not crowded with features, it's built out of contrast: sand, sea, rock, sky, and that's most of what you see, and somehow it's enough. In fact, the sparseness is exactly what gives the place its power. It looks almost simplified, like a version of a coastline where someone removed everything unnecessary and left only the boldest elements behind. And because the peninsula sits inside a protected reserve, the scale of it feels even bigger. This is not just one scenic viewpoint or one dramatic beach, it's a large coastal desert environment where the land and sea keep meeting in sharp, beautiful ways. Some coastlines feel soft and inviting. Paracas feels exposed, open, sun-beaten, wind-shaped. It's the kind of place that you can imagine hearing almost nothing but wind and water. That gives it a very strong atmosphere. It feels almost remote even when you know it's not unreachable. But it is not lifeless. That's one of the best things about it. The reserve protects an important marine coastal ecosystem, and the area supports bird life and other coastal species that depend on a meeting point between the sea and desert. So Paracas is another place that pulls off a very specific trick. It looks harsh, almost empty, and yet it's still full of activity once you know where to look. There's also an older human story here, which helps the place feel even more layered. The wider area is connected to the ancient Paracas culture, so it's not just a dramatic natural setting, it is also a place where people lived, moved, and left traces long before modern visitors started seeing it as a scenic destination. Number 11. The Musandam Peninsula in Oman looks nothing like the version of Arabia most people carry around in their heads. Instead of endless flat desert and broad empty horizons, you get these steep mountains, narrow inlets, and rocky coastlines. It sits at the northern tip of Oman, separated from the rest of the country by the United Arab Emirates. And from the start, it feels like a place that doesn't quite match its surroundings. This is part of what makes it so memorable. Musandam looks like someone took a mountain range and shoved it straight into the sea. The cliffs rise up from the water, the coastline folds in on itself, and the inlets carve deep channels into the rock. These are often compared to fjords, and once you see it, it's easy to understand why. The sea doesn't just border the peninsula, it slices into it. From the water, Musandam can look almost vertical. Settlements appear tucked into the narrow coastal strips or small protected spots beneath the mountains, and the scale of the rock walls make the area feel dramatic even before you know anything about its geography. And the geography is part of the story too. Musandam sits beside the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important maritime choke points in the world. That basically means this surreal-looking peninsula is not just a beautiful outlier, it's also in one of the most strategically significant corners of the planet. And that importance for practicality makes this landscape even better. It's not some forgotten fantasy coast, it is a real working region where geography matters in a very serious way. Many coastal landscapes have cliffs, and many mountain regions have dramatic valleys. Musandam gives you both, pressed tightly together with almost no transition between them. The land feels folded, cut up, and crowded. That makes the whole peninsula seem sculpted rather than formed gradually. And somehow, despite all the severity, it's still inhabited and active. Towns like Kasab make it clear that this is just not scenery. People live there, they work there, and they travel through it and depend on it. And that helps Musandam avoid feeling like a museum piece. It feels lived in, but it's still wild-looking. Number 10. The Snæfellsnes Peninsula feels like Iceland decided to put all of its best ideas into one place. It stretches out into western Iceland, and what makes it so good is how much variety it packs into a relatively small area. It's got lava fields, black beaches, white beaches, fishing villages, cliffs, volcanic peaks, wide bays, and one glacier-capped volcano all show up here. It's the kind of place that makes you feel like the country is just showing off a little. That's why people often say it feels like Iceland but in miniature, and honestly, that description kind of makes sense. Snæfellsnes has the same kind of dramatic contrast the country is famous for, but it all happens up close. You don't have to travel far before the landscape changes again. One stretch feels coastal and open, the next feels volcanic and rough, and then suddenly there's a mountain that looks almost too perfectly shaped to be real. Now that mountain is part of the reason the peninsula is so memorable. Kirkjufell gets a lot of attention, and for good reason, but the western end of the peninsula is dominated by Snæfellsjökull, the glacier-covered volcano that gives the whole area its identity. A volcano with a glacier on top already sounds like Iceland at full strength, and it becomes kind of a landmark that quietly controls the whole mood of this place. But the coastline does help too. There are these long cliff sections, open bays, bird life, lava formations, and fishing settlements that somehow manage to make the peninsula feel wild and inhabited at the same time. It's one of the best things about this place. It doesn't feel empty, it feels lived in, but in a way that still leaves most of the visual power with the land. But visually, it just kind of keeps switching modes, and that's what makes it look unreal. Black rock against white surf, soft green slopes besides the old lava fields, and fishing towns with mountains behind them. Snow or ice is visible above the dark volcanic ground. These contrasts come so fast that the place almost feels like it's been edited, like a version of Iceland designed to include every strong visual element that the country has. Number 9. The Tasman Peninsula in Australia. Now this one looks like the coastline has been pushed right to the limit. It sits in southeastern Tasmania and almost everything about it feels steep and dramatic. It's not the kind of coast that eases into the sea, it just drops off into it. The cliffs are huge, the rock formations almost look too sharp to be natural, and the whole peninsula has that wild Southern Ocean energy. And that's pretty much what makes it stand out. The place feels vertical. A lot of coastal landscapes are about these long beaches and open curves. The Tasman Peninsula is about edges and drop-offs. Cape Pillar and Cape Way, and when you see the actual cliffs here, they more than live up to it. Some of the tallest sea cliffs in Australia are right here, and they give the peninsula a look that's even more severe than scenic in the usual sense. It's beautiful, but in a way that feels a little dangerous. Now the rock formations make this place even better. Places like the Totem Pole, the Candlestick, Tasman Arch, and the Blowhole make the coast feel almost designed for a documentary. The sea here has spent ages attacking the rock, and the result is a landscape full of natural structures that look almost architectural. You get these arches, pillars, narrow stacks, chasms, and cliff faces that seem too straight and dramatic to be accidental. It's got that rare effect where the geology feels like it has a personality. But the peninsula is not just about raw scenery either. It carries a lot of history here, and that gives it much more depth than just, hey, look at those cliffs. This is the same peninsula that includes Port Arthur, one of the best-known convict sites in Australia. That fact changes the atmosphere a bit. Suddenly, the place is not only dramatic because of its coastline, it feels connected to a human story. Isolation, punishment, and a sense of being cut off. On a peninsula like this, that history fits almost too well. And then there's the weather and the light, which do a lot of the work for free. Water can go from steel gray to a deep blue color. The cliffs catch the shadows in ways that make them look even taller. Mist, wind, and clouds can turn the whole area into something that feels staged for maximum mood. It's one of those places that you'd really never get a soft version of the landscape. Even on a nice day, it just looks serious. Number 8. Banks Peninsula looks strange before you know anything about it. Even on a map, it stands out from the rest of the coast of New Zealand's South Island because it really doesn't blend in. It bulges out into the Pacific with this jagged, broken shape full of deep bays and harbors, and the more you look at it, the more it starts feeling like it belongs to a different land altogether. And that's because, in a way, it kind of does. Banks Peninsula was formed by two huge extinct volcanoes. Their remains created the peninsula's shape, and once you know that, everything about it starts making more sense. Those deep harbors are basically the result of volcanic history that are written into the coast. The land is folded and carved in a way that's much harder to explain if you think of it as just another coastal region. But what really makes it look unreal is how clearly the volcanic past still shows up. The bays and the slopes and the broken edges all make the peninsula feel different from the flatter Canterbury Plains nearby. It's one of those places where the shape of the land tells a story before anyone even explains it to you. You just look at it and think, something unusual happened here. And visually, it is a great mix. The hills roll down towards the bays, the small settlements sit around the harbors, and the coastline keeps opening and closing. From above, it can look almost like a gear or a broken circle, and from the ground it feels quieter than the green folded and full of coves and viewpoints that make the whole peninsula seem more intricate. It's not a giant, overwhelming land. It is a strangely shaped one, and that one makes it easier to remember. Akaroa adds another layer though, because it gives the peninsula a human center without taking over the scenery. This harbor is calm compared with the open coast, and this town brings a little history and personality, including its French connection. Banks Peninsula is not just a dramatic volcanic remnant, it's a place where people settled inside the old shape of those volcanoes, and they built communities in the protected folds of the land. That's the thing you remember. It's just such an odd, distinctive piece of land, and it looks like something that just broke away from somewhere else and stopped here by accident. Moving on to number 7. The Sorrento Peninsula looks like the Mediterranean decided to get a bit dramatic. It stretches south from near Naples, it separates the Gulf of Naples from the Gulf of Salerno, and somehow it manages to combine cliffs, terraced hillsides, and sea views all into one narrow strip of land. It's the kind of place where even ordinary roads feel cinematic. A lot of beautiful coastal places have one main feature, maybe the sea, maybe the towns. The Sorrento Peninsula has all of them all at once. The land rises fast and the coastline drops off steeply, but the buildings seem to cling to slopes that look far too steep to be practical, but somehow they are, and they've been there for a very long time. This is not an untouched nature. It is a human settlement that pushed into one of the most dramatic coastal areas in Europe. Towns like Sorrento make the whole place feel polished and lived in, but they don't tame it. If anything, it makes it more impressive because it shows just how much people manage to build into the terrain that clearly has the upper hand. And then there's the larger setting. Looking north, you get the Bay of Naples and often the unmistakable presence of Vesuvius in the distance. Looking south and west, you get the open sea and all the layered beauty that leads towards the Amalfi Coast. So the peninsula never feels visually isolated. It always feels connected to something bigger, a wider history, a coastal system, and a wider Mediterranean drama. The roads are a big part of its appeal too. They twist along the cliffs and pass through towns. There's something about a place that looks spectacular and inhabited at the same time that gives it extra energy. It doesn't feel like a postcard, it feels like a real place people somehow learned to live in without ruining what made it special in the first place. Terraces, gardens, olive groves, lemon groves, the old stonework, churches, villas, all of it stacked into a landscape that already would have looked impressive without any of it. Every direction seems to have a foreground, a background, and then another background behind that. Number 6. The Lleyn Peninsula in Wales feels like one of those places that should be more famous than it is. It reaches out into the Irish Sea from northwestern Wales with a long, clean shape that already looks satisfying on a map. But once you start looking closer, it gets way better than that. This is a peninsula that has wide bays, offshore islands, old hill forts, pilgrimage routes, and the coastlines that feel both peaceful and remote at the same time. But what makes Lleyn so good is that it's got a very strong sense of place without really needing to be loud about it. Some landscapes do try to overwhelm you right away. Lleyn works more quietly. It's beautiful, but in a way that feels settled, older, and deeply rooted. The sea is always nearby, and the curves of the coast are easy on your eyes. The village feels tied to the land rather than just dropped onto it, and the farther out towards the tip you go, the more the peninsula starts to feel like a world narrowing up into the water. You're always aware that the land is reaching outwards here, and that makes the place near the tip feel way more dramatic than it would on an ordinary coastline. Bardsey Island, sitting just off the end, only makes the effect stronger, and once you see it, the peninsula stops feeling like a stretch of coast, and it starts feeling like a route, something pushing you towards the edge. And Bardsey itself adds a lot. It's got centuries of history behind it, which instantly gives the whole area a deeper mood. And suddenly, the peninsula is not just scenic, it becomes one of those places people have approached with a purpose for a very long time. Then there's one of the most impressive hill forts in Britain, sitting high above the peninsula. Because now you've got coast, island, and an ancient stronghold all belonging to the same relatively compact strip of land. It gives the place a kind of completeness. The sea, the elevation, the history, and the atmosphere are all together. This doesn't feel like a generic coastline. It feels distinct. The language, the place names, the cultural continuity, all of that helps give Lleyn a strong identity. And that can be hard to explain in simple visual terms, but you feel it anyway. This peninsula has personality. Number 5. The Antarctic Peninsula looks like the planet forgot to make it subtle. It stretches northwards from the Antarctic mainland towards South America like a giant blade of ice and mountain, and even from a distance it looks severe. It's not just a frozen coast, it is a broken mass of glaciers, peaks, islands, channels, and ice-choked water that seems to sit halfway between a continent and something still being built. What makes it look unreal, though, is how extreme everything is. The mountains are sharp and they jut straight toward the sea, and the coastline so broken up that it often looks like land is splintering into the ocean. The icebergs float offshore, snow and rock meet in the contrast, and the light can make the whole place look almost monochrome until suddenly a darker cliff or a blue ice face breaks through. This is the kind of landscape that almost doesn't need explanation because of its effect. It's so strong on its own. The peninsula just looks cold in a way few places do. Not like cold winter, like cold permanent condition. Cold like the whole landmass belongs to part of the world where weather, sea, and ice are in charge all the time. But the more you learn about it, the better it gets. This is one of the more accessible parts of Antarctica, just for research and expedition travel, and it's become one of the places where people can still actually see just how dynamic the Antarctic edge really is. The glaciers here are not still. The ice shelves shift, the coastlines change, and the peninsula is not frozen in the sense of being static. It's active, but in a slow, icy way. And then there's the wildlife. Now that helps a lot because it keeps the place from feeling like a dead white void. Penguins, seals, seabirds, and marine life all belong here, which create one of the coolest contrasts in nature. A place that looks impossibly hostile to life is still full of it. That makes the peninsula feel even stranger. It's not just a land, it is a functioning world. Visually, though, the main thing is the scale of it. Long glaciers descend into the ocean, and it can look less like a normal piece of geography and more like a model of what people think Antarctica should look like in their heads. Only this is real, it's bigger, and it's way harsher. Number 4. Kamchatka. In Russia, it looks like the sort of place a fantasy artist would invent. It's a huge peninsula in far eastern Russia, boxed in by the Sea of Okhotsk on one side and on the Pacific and the Bering Seas on the other. Almost everything about it feels oversized. The rivers are big, the mountains are big, and the wildlife is big. Plus, the volcanoes are so numerous and dramatic that after a while they just stop feeling like individual landmarks and just feel like the default setting of the entire region. Now, most places would be satisfied with one great volcano. Kamchatka has dozens of them, and a lot of them actually look the way we want volcanoes to look, not just rough hills with a volcanic past. I mean serious cones, snow-covered slopes, steam, lava, history, ash, the whole valley shaped by fire and heat. It's one of the few places in the world where volcanic doesn't feel like a category, it just feels like the entire mood of the place. If Kamchatka were only a giant wilderness of fire and rock, that would be already enough. But it's also got wide river systems, bear country, salmon runs, geysers, and hot springs. It can swing from broad and bleak to incredibly dramatic. So instead of feeling like one landscape, it feels like several of them all piled into the same peninsula. You start with a remote northern peninsula, then you find out it's got one of the greatest concentrations of active volcanoes. Then you find out it also has the Valley of Geysers, one of the largest geyser fields on Earth. And then you add brown bears, huge rivers full of salmon, black sand in places, even snow-capped peaks and steaming ground, where the weather alone can make the whole place feel prehistoric. At a certain point, the land here stops sounding normal, and it just starts sounding like a place Earth built when it was feeling competitive. Visually, Kamchatka has a big advantage over a lot of other famous landscapes. It is clean, not tidy, but clean in the sense that the shapes are read clearly. Volcanoes rise in strong forms, the valleys are cut deeply, and the rivers move through the broad terrain. You don't have to squint to understand this place. The geography does a lot of that work instantly. One look at a snow-covered cone with vapor dripping off the nearby ground and you already get it. That's why it feels so cinematic, too. A lot of landscapes are beautiful in person, but less memorable once you try to describe them. Kamchatka is the opposite. The place almost sounds exaggerated, even when you're being careful. There are volcanoes here that rise more than 4,000 meters, and somehow all of that still shares space with one of the richest wildlife regions in northern Eurasia. The bears are part of the image whether you want them there or not. Kamchatka has a famously large brown bear population. The place doesn't feel scenic in a soft, comfortable way. It feels like it in the old-fashioned sense, and that's exactly the kind of energy that makes a place feel larger than it is. If anything, the scale of the landscape is more obvious here. The settlements feel small compared with what surrounds them. The volcanoes still dominate, the rivers dominate, the weather dominates. It's one of those places where human presence doesn't erase the feeling of rawness, it just gives you the reference point to how huge everything else is. This peninsula is bordered by cold seas and big weather, and that gives the whole place a maritime roughness that stops it from feeling like a purely inland park. The land rises from the water, the weather moves in hard, and the whole peninsula feels exposed to more than one force at a time. Number 3. Baja, California. It stretches south from the United States along northwestern Mexico like a long, narrow, almost perfectly drawn strip of land, with the Pacific on one side and the Gulf of California on the other. From above, it's got one of the cleanest, strongest silhouettes on Earth. It looks less like an accident of geology and more like a giant piece of land that got sliced away from the mainland, which in a strange way is not that far off. That's part of what makes Baja so cool. Its look is tied directly to its origin. This peninsula really was shaped by tectonic forces pulling it away from mainland Mexico over millions of years. So when you stare that long at a detached-looking form beside the continent, you are not imagining things. It really does have that separated, almost peeled-away feeling built into it. The contrast of Baja is its superpower. It's a peninsula with two personalities running side by side. The Pacific side feels bigger, it's rougher, more exposed. The Gulf side feels more enclosed, more tropical, more sharply colored. In between, though, the land is dry, ridged, and tough-looking. There are mountain chains running down the peninsula, stretches of desert and plant life that makes the whole place feel like its own category of awesome. Cardon cactus, bujum trees, elephant trees, even the plants in Baja look like they belong somewhere else other than normal Earth. The bujum tree is a good example of why Baja stays in your mind. It's one of those plants that almost looks fake the first time you see it, like a Dr. Seuss tree that just wandered into a documentary. And Baja is full of that kind of thing. It's not just a pretty desert, it's a desert with a strange visual vocabulary. And then the marine side of Baja completely changes the picture again. The Gulf of California is one of the richest marine ecoregions in the world, which means this long dry peninsula is not just surrounded by water in a decorative way. Whales, dolphins, sea lions, sharks, fish, island ecosystems, suddenly the peninsula becomes a place where the desert terrain is sitting right beside an incredibly productive marine world. That combination's hard to beat, and it gives Baja a split-screen quality. That's kind of why Baja never quite settles down into a single identity. It's coastal, it's desert, it's tectonic, it's marine, it's mountainous, it's open and narrow and isolated looking all at once. And because it's so long, the peninsula feels like a world of its own rather than one region with one mood. There's also something very satisfying about its scale. Baja is big enough that it feels like an actual landmass, not just a scenic extension of somewhere else. It's over 1,200 kilometers long, and that length is important because it gives the peninsula a kind of authority on the map. Even people who have never visited can understand the appeal almost instantly. The shape is iconic, the desert is light and sharp, the water on both sides create a constant contrast. The roads and towns feel small against this place. Everything seems designed to make the peninsula look cleaner, longer, and, of course, stranger. Number 2. The Sinai Peninsula in Egypt looks important before you know anything about it. That's one of the first things that makes it stand out. Even on a map, it's got this bold triangular form wedged between two arms of the Red Sea, connecting Africa and Asia in a way that feels too clean to be natural. It looks ancient, and it looks like the kind of landmass that people would have been thinking about for thousands of years. And of course, they have. But Sinai is not just interesting because of where it is, it's interesting because of how different its parts are, and that's really what gives it this unreal quality. The north has broad plains and dune systems, the interior turns harsh and dry, then farther south the land suddenly rises into mountains cut by deep rocky valleys that look far more severe than most people expect from Egypt. Sinai is not one flat desert triangle, it's got some vertical drama to it. The southern mountain zone is where the peninsula really changes. The rock gets darker and sharper, the valleys become narrow and winding, and the whole place starts to look less like a desert in the simple sandy sense and more like a sacred landscape, which historically is exactly how a lot of people have understood it. Sinai is one of those rare places where the physical terrain and the symbolic weight of the terrain reinforce each other perfectly. This is the land of Mount Sinai, St. Catherine's Monastery, pilgrimage routes, and stories that have shaped three major religions. And whatever someone personally believes, that history gives the peninsula a kind of gravity that's hard to ignore. It's one thing for a mountain range to look dramatic, it's another for that same mountain range to carry thousands of years of historical meaning. And Sinai does both. It makes the land feel heavier in the best way. It's not just scenery, it feels loaded. At the southern tip, you get the coastline around places like Ras Mohammed, where the desert meets some of the most vivid reef environments in the region. This contrast is almost ridiculous. One moment the land is rock, heat, sand, and dry wadis. The next it's coral, blue water, and marine life. Very few peninsulas can swing that hard between environments. The Gulf of Aqaba side in particular looks dramatic because the mountains rise so close to the water, and that creates a striking scene where the bare rock walls seem to drop almost directly towards the brilliant blue. It is a very sharp, high-contrast look, which gives Sinai some of its most memorable images. Sinai's history, of course, pushes it even higher. It's been a corridor, a frontier, a military route, trade route, and a place of retreat, a place of conflict, and a place of pilgrimage for thousands of years. That's one reason it feels bigger than it actually is. The land itself is already dramatic, but then the weight of everything that's moved across it makes it feel even bigger. You don't look at Sinai as just a shape. You look at it as one of those crossroads where history and geography are inseparable. Some peninsulas are interesting on the ground, but not especially striking as whole shapes. Sinai works both ways. From above, it is iconic. From the ground, it keeps changing, and that combination's rare. It's got map presence and a physical presence. Number 1. Shiretoko Peninsula of Japan. The Shiretoko Peninsula. This looks like the kind of place that should be much farther north than it is. It pushes out from Hokkaido into the Sea of Okhotsk, and for a lot of the year it feels wild in a way that's hard to find now. The coastline's steep, the forests are dense, the mountains rise up, and in winter, the sea fills with drift ice. Now that last part's really what changes the look of the whole place. Once the ice arrives, Shiretoko stops looking like a normal coastline, and it starts looking like the edge of another world. Most peninsulas are memorable because of one main feature. Shiretoko has several, and they all work together. You've got the cold sea, the rugged mountains, the waterfalls, cliffs, river valleys, thick forest, and one of the richest wildlife areas in all of Japan packed into one narrow stretch of land. This feels like a complete natural system. The system is what makes it so interesting. The drift ice that reaches Shiretoko in the winter is not just dramatic, it also helps support the marine life in the surrounding waters. So the peninsula has this unusual feeling that everything belongs to the same story. The sea matters to the land matters to the animals, and the whole place feels connected in a way that most landscapes don't. In one season, you can have white ice pressed against the dark coast with snow sitting on the slopes above it. In another, the forest turns green, the cliffs stand out more sharply, and the waterfalls become the main feature. But from the boats, the coast can look almost sealed off with steep rock faces and long stretches that feel difficult to reach. And even from higher ground, the peninsula looks even stranger, like a narrow arm pushing out into the cold water. Then the wildlife adds even more. The brown bears, deers, foxes, the seabirds, eagles, seals, and marine life all belong here. And that's important because Shiretoko doesn't feel decorative, it feels alive, and it looks amazing and active at the same time, which makes it feel bigger than it really is. But another thing that helps much of Shiretoko still feel hard to access, there are roads and towns around the outer parts, but large areas of the peninsula still seem controlled by the land itself. That gives it a real edge-of-the-map kind of quality. It doesn't feel fully opened up, it feels like nature has most of the power there. But that's why Shiretoko works so well as number one here. It's got the icy drama, the steep coast, the dense forest, the wildlife, and the rare feeling that the whole thing is one connected living land. It looks unreal, not because it's flashy, but because it seems too complete, too wild, it's too dramatic, too full of life for a place that can look this cold and severe. It's one of those rare places that feels impressive from every angle, in every season, and on every scale.